Everyone warned her not to take the job at the cruel millionaire's house, but she did and got a surprise she never expected. Hi, my beautiful garden of flowers. Before I say anything else, close your eyes for a second and let this prayer hold you. May every invisible battle you're fighting be met with divine strength. May your nights be softer, your mornings brighter, and your soul never feel alone again. May the angels wrap around your home like sunlight, and may every silent tear you've ever cried water the roots of a joy that's coming. You are not forgotten, you are not unseen, you are deeply loved. My dear family, my roses, my lilies, my wildflowers, I missed you in ways I cannot explain. I've been writing and creating with every beat of my healing heart, but something feels off. Maybe my words don't shine like they used to. Maybe my voice lost a little color after the heart issues, and if that's true, please forgive me. But I'm still here, standing in the garden we built together, still believing in us. If you still feel me, if your heart is still connected to mine, comment below, "I'm with Mr. Peter." It takes just a few seconds, but it tells me you still believe in the magic we've shared. Please watch the full story. Don't walk away in the middle. Every second is a love letter, handwritten just for you. With a heart full of petals and prayers, yours forever, Mr. Peter. Sometimes the jobs nobody wants are the ones that change everything. Debbie Bell stared at the eviction notice trembling in her hands, the red ink bleeding like tears across the white paper. 24 hours. That's all she had left before losing the tiny apartment that had been her sanctuary, her sister's refuge, their last piece of dignity in a world that seemed determined to crush them both. There has to be something, she whispered to herself, scrolling through job listings on her cracked phone screen for the 100th time that morning. Each rejection email felt like another door slamming in her face, another dream dying before it could even breathe. The employment agency's waiting room smelled of desperation and cheap coffee. Debbie smoothed her only interview dress, a navy blue number she'd bought for graduation 3 years ago, before life had stripped away her optimism layer by layer. Her dark skin glowed despite her exhaustion, and her natural hair was pulled back in an elegant bun that showcased the graceful curve of her neck. Debbie Bell. Ms. Harrison, the agency director, emerged from her office with the expression Debbie couldn't read. In her 50s, with silver hair and tired eyes, she'd seen enough broken dreams to fill a cemetery. "I have one position left," Ms. Harrison said, settling behind her desk. "But I must warn you, it's the job everyone refuses." Debbie leaned forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'll take it." "You haven't heard the details yet." "I don't care." The words came out fierce, desperate. "My sister needs surgery, and I'm about to be homeless. Whatever it is, I'll take it." Ms. Harrison studied her with something that might have been admiration. "Live-in domestic position, Potomac Heights estate. The pay is—" She paused, sliding a paper across the desk. "Generous." Debbie's eyes widened at the number. It was more than generous. It was life-changing. "What's the catch?" "The employer is difficult. Darren Preece. You've probably heard of him." Everyone had heard of Darren Preece, billionaire tech mogul, reclusive genius, the man who'd revolutionized 3 industries before his 30th birthday. The newspapers called him brilliant. Former employees called him impossible. Difficult how? Ms. Harrison's laugh held no humor. In the past 2 years, he's gone through 47 housekeepers, 12 personal assistants, and 6 chefs. The longest anyone lasted was 3 weeks. What happened to them? He fired them all. No explanation, no warning, just gone. She leaned back in her chair. The man lives like a hermit in that mansion, barely speaks to anyone. The staff that remain have been there for years, and they're protective of their privacy about what goes on in that house. Debbie thought of Bethesda lying in that hospital bed, her beautiful sister growing weaker each day without the surgery she needed. She thought of the eviction notice, of sleeping in her car, of watching everything she'd worked for crumble to dust. When do I start? 3 hours later, Debbie stood before wrought iron gates that seemed to stretch toward heaven itself. The Priest estate was a Gothic masterpiece of stone and shadows, all sharp angles and dark windows that watched her like eyes. Ancient oak trees lined the circular driveway, their branches creating a cathedral of green above her head. Her single suitcase felt pathetic in her hand as she approached the massive front door. Before she could knock, it swung open to reveal a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a neat chignon. "You must be Debbie," the woman said, her voice warm as honey. "I'm Georgetown Madison, the head housekeeper. Thank the Lord someone finally came." Georgetown led her through halls that belonged in a museum. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows on marble floors, and priceless artwork adorned walls that seemed to whisper secrets. Everything was beautiful and cold, like a palace made of ice. "A few rules," Georgetown said as they climbed a grand staircase. "Mr. Priest doesn't like to be disturbed before noon. He takes his meals alone in his study. And whatever you do, don't ask him personal questions. He values his privacy above all else." "Has he really fired 47 people?" Georgetown's steps faltered. 48, actually. But it's not what you think. He's not cruel, just... She searched for the right word. Broken. They reached a bedroom that took Debbie's breath away. Soft lavender walls, a four-poster bed that could have housed royalty, and windows that overlooked gardens that seemed to stretch for miles. "This is yours," Georgetown said. "Mr. Priest insisted you have the best guest room." "He insisted? He's not a monster, dear. Just a man who's forgotten how to let people close." Georgetown's eyes held a sadness that spoke of years watching someone suffer. "Dinner is at 7. I'll show you the kitchen tomorrow, but tonight, rest. You look like you haven't slept in weeks." Debbie had just finished unpacking when a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find a young man in an expensive suit, his sandy hair perfectly styled and his blue eyes curious. "You must be the new housekeeper," he said with a smile that could have launched ships. "Montgomery Capital. I'm Darren's oldest friend. Debbie Bell." She shook his outstretched hand, noting the genuine warmth in his grip. "Brave of you to take this job. Or desperate." His smile softened the words. "Either way, I'm glad you're here. He needs Montgomery." The voice cut through the air like a blade, deep and commanding. Debbie turned toward the sound and forgot how to breathe. Darren Priest stood at the end of the hallway like something carved from marble and midnight. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the predatory grace of a man accustomed to owning everything he surveyed. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his Arctic blue eyes held depths that seemed to go on forever. But it was the anguish in those eyes that stopped her heart. Raw, devastating torment that he carried like a physical weight. "I didn't realize we were entertaining," he said, his voice carefully neutral as his gaze swept over Debbie. She felt that look like a physical touch, a warmth that started in her chest and spread through her entire body. When their eyes met, something electric passed between them. Recognition, hunger, a connection so sudden and fierce it left her breathless. "Just welcoming our new staff member," Montgomery said, seemingly oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. "Debbie, I know who he is." Debbie found her voice, proud that it didn't shake. "Mr. Priest." Darren stepped closer, and she caught his scent, expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him that made her pulse race. He was even more beautiful up close, all sharp cheekbones and sensual mouth, but those eyes held enough sorrow to drown in. "Miss Bell." Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I trust Georgetown has shown you to your room?" "Yes, sir. It's beautiful. Thank you." Something flickered across his face at her politeness. "Tomorrow you'll begin your duties. Georgetown will explain everything." He turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Ms. Bell, welcome to my home." The way he said home made it sound like a prison. As his footsteps faded down the marble hallway, Debbie realized she was holding her breath. Montgomery was watching her with knowing eyes. "Well," he said softly, "this is going to be interesting." That night, as rain painted patterns on her bedroom windows, Debbie lay awake thinking about steel blue eyes and the way a stranger's pain had reached straight into her heart. She'd taken this job to save her sister, to save herself. She had no idea she was about to save someone else entirely. Outside her window, in the master suite across the garden, Darren Priest stood watching the rain and thinking about warm brown eyes that had seen straight through his carefully constructed walls. For the first time in 5 years, he wasn't thinking about the past. He was thinking about tomorrow. Chapter 2. The Fortress of His Heart. A man can build walls so high he forgets there's a world worth seeing beyond them. Dawn crept through the estate like a whispered secret, painting the marble floors in shades of gold and rose. Debbie woke to the sound of silence, a silence so complete it felt alive, pressing against her skin like velvet. In her old apartment, mornings had been chaos, traffic, neighbors arguing, sirens wailing. Here, even the birds seemed to sing in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb the sleeping palace. She dressed quickly in her simple black uniform, her reflection in the ornate mirror looking small and uncertain. The girl staring back at her had no idea she was about to spend the day discovering that sometimes the most beautiful cages are the ones we build for ourselves. Georgetown was already in the kitchen when Debbie arrived, her silver hair catching the morning light as she moved with practiced efficiency. The kitchen was a chef's dream, all marble countertops and copper pots, with windows that overlooked gardens so perfect they seemed painted. "Good morning, dear," Georgetown said, handing her a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months." Debbie wrapped her hands around the warm mug, inhaling the rich aroma. "This place is incredible." "It is," Georgetown agreed, but something in her tone suggested beauty came with a price. "Now, let me explain your duties." As they walked through the mansion, Georgetown painted a picture of a life lived in careful isolation. Darren's bedroom was on the 3rd floor, off limits. His private study was on the 2nd floor, also forbidden. The library, the art room, and the conservatory were his domains after sunset. "He's nocturnal," Georgetown explained as they entered a sitting room that looked like it had never been sat in. "Sleeps until noon, works until dawn, like a beautiful ghost haunting his own home." "What happened to him?" Debbie asked, running her fingers along a piano that gleamed like black water. "Montgomery said he was broken." Georgetown's face closed like a door. "That's not my story to tell, child, but I will say this. He wasn't always like this. 5 years ago, he was different, laughed more, lived more." She touched a framed photograph on the mantel, then quickly pulled her hand away. Some wounds cut so deep they never stopped bleeding. The day passed in a rhythm of quiet tasks. Debbie dusted priceless artwork, arranged flowers that would never be admired, and prepared meals for a man who ate alone. The house felt like a mausoleum dedicated to a life half-lived. But there were signs of hidden kindness, small gestures that spoke of a heart still beating beneath the ice. The finest towels had been placed in her bathroom. A note on her dresser informed her that her sister's hospital bills had been paid in full, signed only with the initial D. When she asked Georgetown about it, the older woman just smiled knowingly. He has his ways of taking care of people, Georgetown said. He just doesn't want credit for it. As afternoon faded into evening, Debbie found herself drawn to the library. Georgetown had mentioned it was Darren's sanctuary after dark, but the golden hour light streaming through the tall windows made it irresistible. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held leather-bound treasures, and a reading nook by the fireplace looked like something from a fairy tale. She was reaching for a volume of Neruda's poetry when a voice made her freeze. "That's one of my favorites." Darren emerged from the shadows like something conjured from her dreams. He wore dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that clung to his broad shoulders, his hair slightly mussed as if he'd just woken up. But it was his eyes that captured her, those devastating Arctic blue eyes that seemed to see everything and trust nothing. "I'm sorry," she said, pulling her hand back from the shelf. "Georgetown said you used this room in the evenings. I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding." He moved closer, and she caught that intoxicating scent again, sandalwood and something darker, more mysterious. "Do you enjoy poetry?" "I love it." The words came out breathless. Being this close to him did things to her pulse that should have been illegal. Pablo Neruda especially. His words are like prayers written in fire, he finished, his voice soft with something that might have been wonder. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the careful distance he maintained crumbled. She saw hunger there, loneliness, and something else, a recognition that made her heart race. "Yes," she whispered, "exactly like that." He reached past her for the book, his arm brushing hers with contact that sent electricity shooting through her entire body. She inhaled sharply and he froze, his face inches from hers. "I should go," he said, but he didn't move. "Should you?" The question hung between them like a challenge. His gaze dropped to her lips, and she felt herself leaning toward him, drawn by a force stronger than gravity. Then he stepped back, the shutters falling over his eyes like armor sliding into place. "Enjoy the poetry, Miss Bell." He was gone before she could find her voice, leaving only the scent of sandalwood and the echo of her racing heart. Dinner was a solitary affair in the kitchen with Georgetown, who seemed to sense her distraction. "He's a good man," Georgetown said suddenly, not looking up from her soup. "Whatever you're thinking about him, and I can see you're thinking, remember that. Under all that ice, he's got the kindest heart I've ever known." "He paid for my sister's surgery," Debbie said. "Why would he do that for a stranger?" "Because he knows what it's like to watch someone you love suffer and be powerless to stop it." Georgetown's voice was heavy with old grief. "He's been carrying guilt for 5 years, punishing himself for something that wasn't his fault." "What happened?" Georgetown was quiet for so long, Debbie thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she set down her spoon and met Debbie's eyes. "He was engaged to a beautiful girl named Elena Rosewood. Society princess, kind heart, the perfect match for a billionaire's son. They were planning their wedding when—" She shook her head. "Car accident. He was driving. She died instantly. He survived without a scratch, and it's been killing him ever since." Debbie's heart shattered for the broken man upstairs. "He blames himself. Completely. Won't hear otherwise. Before Elena, he was warm, generous, full of life. He built these walls so high I sometimes wonder if he remembers there's a world outside them." That night, Debbie couldn't sleep. The house creaked and settled around her like a living thing, and her mind kept returning to steel blue eyes and the pain they carried. She found herself wandering the halls, drawn by some instinct she couldn't name. The library door was ajar, warm light spilling into the corridor like an invitation. She peered inside and saw him sitting in the window seat, staring out at the moonlit gardens. In his hand was a photograph, the same one Georgetown had touched earlier. "Couldn't sleep either?" His voice wasn't startled, as if he'd sensed her presence. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, her bare feet silent on the Persian rug. "I'm not used to so much quiet," she said. "In my old neighborhood, something was always happening. Sirens, music, people arguing or laughing. Here it's so peaceful, it's almost lonely." He looked at her then, really looked. His gaze taking in her simple cotton nightgown and the way her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. She felt beautiful under that look, cherished in a way she'd never experienced. "Loneliness is a choice," he said finally. "I chose it." "Why?" He held up the photograph, a stunning blonde woman with bright eyes and a radiant smile. "Elena. She was everything good in this world, and I killed her." "No." The word came out fierce, surprising them both. "You didn't kill her. Accidents happen. Tragedy happens. But survival isn't a crime, and living isn't a betrayal." Something cracked in his expression, a hairline fracture in the ice. "You don't understand. She was perfect, and I was reckless, driving too fast in the rain because I was angry about some stupid business deal. She told me to slow down, and I—" His voice broke. The last thing she said was my name. Debbie moved without thinking, crossing the space between them and kneeling beside his chair. She took his hand, the one not holding the photograph, and felt him tremble. "I'm sure she didn't blame you," she said softly. "Love doesn't work that way. She wouldn't want you to spend your life in this beautiful prison, punishing yourself for being human." He stared at their joined hands as if he'd never seen anything like it. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen you," she said. "The way you paid for my sister's surgery without wanting credit. The way Georgetown talks about you like you hung the moon. The way you make sure I have everything I need while pretending you don't care. That's not the heart of a killer, Darren. That's the heart of a man who loves so deeply he's afraid of hurting anyone else." When he looked at her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You see too much. I see someone worth saving." The silence stretched between them, charged with possibility. His thumb traced across her knuckles, and she felt herself falling into those blue depths. "Debbie," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. "Yes. Thank you for seeing me." She stayed with him until dawn painted the sky pink, neither of them speaking, her hand in his, as he finally let himself grieve. When Georgetown found them there, asleep in each other's company, she simply smiled and tiptoed away. Some walls, she thought, were meant to fall. Chapter 3. Cracks in the Ice. Thunder has a way of revealing the storms we carry inside. The tempest arrived like an uninvited guest, rolling across the Virginia sky with the fury of the gods themselves. Debbie woke to the sound of rain lashing against her windows and wind howling through the estate's ancient bones. Lightning split the darkness in violent flashes, illuminating her room in stark black and white before plunging it back into shadow. She'd been at the Priest estate for a week now, 7 days of carefully choreographed interactions with a man who seemed determined to maintain his distance even as his eyes followed her every movement. 7 days of stolen glances and conversations that danced around the edges of something neither of them dared name. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt electric with more than just the storm. The digital clock read 2:47 a.m. when she heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze in her veins. A cry, raw and desperate, echoing through the halls like a wounded animal in pain. It came again, and this time she recognized the voice. Darren. Without thinking, she threw on her robe and padded barefoot through the corridors, following the sound to its source. The master wing was forbidden territory, but the anguish in that cry shattered every rule Georgetown had given her. His bedroom door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway. Through the gap, she could see him thrashing in a bed that could have housed a small army, his powerful body tangled in sheets that looked like silk clouds. His dark hair was damp with sweat, and even in sleep, his face was contorted with an agony that took her breath away. "No!" he moaned, his voice breaking. "Elena, please! I'm sorry! I'm so sorry!" Lightning illuminated his face as another cry tore from his throat, and Debbie's heart shattered completely. This was raw, primal grief, the kind that lived in your bones and poisoned your dreams. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The master suite was a study in masculine elegance, all dark wood and midnight blue silk, with windows that overlooked the gardens now being battered by the storm. But she barely noticed the luxury. Her entire focus was on the man destroying himself with guilt, even in sleep. "Darren," she whispered, approaching the bed slowly. "Darren, wake up." He thrashed harder, caught in the nightmare's grip. "Should have been me. Should have been me." "Darren." She sat on the edge of the mattress, her hand hovering over his shoulder. "You're dreaming. Come back to me." Her touch seemed to anchor him. His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused, and for a moment he looked like a lost child rather than a powerful billionaire. When he saw her, confusion flickered across his features. "Debbie." His voice was hoarse, broken. Why are you here?" "You were having a nightmare," she said softly, her hand still resting on his shoulder. She could feel the heat of his skin through the thin cotton of his t-shirt, could feel the rapid beating of his heart. "I heard you from my room." Embarrassment flooded his face, and he tried to pull away. "You shouldn't be here. This isn't appropriate." "Stop!" She tightened her grip, refusing to let him retreat. "Don't you dare apologize for being human. Don't you dare be ashamed of grieving someone you loved." Thunder crashed overhead, and he flinched as if the sound was a physical blow. She saw it then, the fear hidden beneath all that control. He was terrified of storms because storms had taken everything from him. "It was raining that night," he whispered, his eyes distant. "Just like this. She said we should wait, that the roads were too dangerous. But I was angry about the Peterson merger falling through, and I thought I knew better. I always thought I knew better." "Tell me about her," Debbie said, settling more comfortably on the bed. "Tell me about Eleanor." For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then an emotion in her eyes, compassion maybe, or simple human kindness, seemed to break the last of his resistance. "She was sunshine," he said, his voice soft with memory. Literally sunshine in human form. Golden hair, bright laugh, always saw the best in everyone. She volunteered at children's hospitals and animal shelters. She made me want to be better than I was. She sounds wonderful. She was perfect, and I was. He struggled for words. Driven, obsessed with success. I worked 18-hour days and expected her to understand. She never complained, never asked for more than I could give. Maybe if she had, I would have realized what I was taking for granted. Lightning flashed again, and this time he didn't flinch. Her presence seemed to calm the storm inside him, even as the one outside raged on. The night she died, she'd planned this romantic dinner at home. Candles, her grandmother's china, my favorite meal. But the Peterson deal was imploding, and I had to go to the office. She waited for me until almost midnight. Oh, Darren. When I finally got home, she was still awake, still waiting. She'd saved my dinner in the oven, and she smiled like she wasn't disappointed at all. That's when I knew I had to make it up to her, so I suggested we drive to our favorite spot overlooking the city. She said the weather was too dangerous, but I insisted. I was used to getting my way. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles white with tension. The roads were slick, visibility was almost zero. I should have listened to her. I should have stayed home and counted my blessings. Instead, I drove too fast around a curve and hit a patch of standing water. The car hydroplaned. It was an accident, Debbie said firmly. A tragic, terrible accident, but not murder. The car flipped 3 times before hitting a tree. I woke up in the hospital with minor bruises. She never woke up at all. Tears ran down his face like rain on windows. The last thing she said was, "I love you, be careful." And I killed her for it. Debbie felt her own tears falling as she reached for him, pulling his head against her shoulder. He resisted for a moment, then collapsed against her like a dam finally breaking. His arms went around her waist, holding her so tightly it almost hurt, and she felt 5 years of grief pouring out of him in waves. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, stroking his hair. "I'm so sorry you've been carrying this alone." They stayed like that as the storm raged outside, her holding him while he finally let himself feel everything he'd been running from. When the tears finally stopped, he didn't pull away. Instead, he lifted his head to look at her, his eyes raw but somehow clearer than she'd ever seen them. "Why are you here?" he asked. "In my room, in my house, in my life? Why aren't you running from the broken man who can't even sleep without falling apart?" "Because," she said, cupping his face in her hands, "broken doesn't mean worthless. It means human, and you're the most beautifully human person I've ever met." Before she could lose her nerve, she leaned down and pressed her lips to his forehead, a soft benediction that tasted like forgiveness. He inhaled sharply, his hands tightening on her waist. "Debbie," he breathed, her name a prayer and a plea. "I'm here," she whispered against his skin. "I'm not going anywhere." She meant to leave after he fell back asleep, but somehow dawn found them curled together on his massive bed, her still in her robe, him holding her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the world. Georgetown found them there and simply smiled, leaving fresh coffee and croissants on the nightstand before tiptoeing away. The next morning brought Montgomery Capital bearing coffee and concern. He found Debbie in the kitchen with Georgetown, both women wearing the secretive smiles of those who'd witnessed something beautiful. "How is he?" Montgomery asked without preamble. He'd known Darren since childhood, and the shadows under his friend's eyes had been growing deeper each year. "Better," Georgetown said simply. "The storms don't usually affect him so badly, but last night was different. Worse. Until ... Until Debbie," Montgomery finished, understanding immediately. He studied the young woman who'd managed to reach his friend when no one else could. "You know about Elena." It wasn't a question. "He told me about the accident," Debbie confirmed. "The guilt he's carrying." Montgomery's expression grew thoughtful. "Did he tell you about the aftermath? How he blamed himself so completely he gave up everything that brought him joy? The music, the art, the company of friends? How he turned this beautiful home into a monastery dedicated to self-punishment?" "He's afraid," Debbie said quietly. "Afraid of caring again because caring means risking loss." "Exactly. And you, my dear, are the first person in 5 years to make him forget that fear, even for a moment." Montgomery stayed for lunch, regaling them with stories of Darren before the accident, a man who laughed easily, loved deeply, and dreamed in colors instead of shadows. As he spoke, Debbie began to understand the magnitude of what grief had stolen from the world. "He was going to propose to Elena that night," Montgomery revealed as he prepared to leave. "Had the ring in his pocket and everything. Sometimes I think he blames himself not just for her death, but for all the life they never got to live together." That afternoon, while Darren worked in his study, Debbie began a new ritual. She left small notes around the house, in books he might read, beside his coffee cup, tucked into the piano bench where he sometimes sat to stare at the keys he no longer played. "The music in you is still there, waiting to be heard again." Elena's love didn't die with her. It lives in every kindness you show. Healing doesn't dishonor the past. It honors the future she wanted for you. She never signed them, but somehow he knew they were from her. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. He started eating meals with Georgetown and Debbie instead of hiding in his study. He asked about her sister Bethesda's recovery. He even smiled once when Debbie told a story about her childhood that had Georgetown laughing until she cried. But it was the night she fell ill that everything truly shifted. She'd been fighting a cold for days, pushing through her duties despite Georgetown's protests. When she finally collapsed while arranging flowers, burning with fever and shaking with chills, it was Darren who carried her to her room. "Call Dr. Westbrook," he ordered Georgetown, his voice tight with something that might have been panic. "It's just a flu," Debbie protested weakly from her bed. "I'll be fine tomorrow." "You'll be fine when I say you're fine," he replied, and there was something almost violent in his protectiveness that made her heart race despite her illness. Dr. Westbrook confirmed it was indeed just flu, but Darren refused to leave her side. He brought her soup that he'd made himself, clumsy but edible, and cool cloths for her fever. When she was too weak to hold a cup, he helped her drink water, his strong hands infinitely gentle. "You don't have to stay," she whispered as evening fell. "I'm sure you have important things to do." "Nothing is more important than this," he said simply. "Than you." The words hung between them like a confession. She reached for his hand, threading their fingers together. "Darren, rest," he said, bringing their joined hands to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "I'll be here when you wake up." She did wake up, several times throughout the night, and each time he was there, reading in the chair beside her bed, or simply watching her with an expression so tender it took her breath away. Once, she woke to find him asleep in the chair, still holding her hand, and she realized something that made her heart soar and terrify her in equal measure. She was falling in love with him, and from the way he looked at her, the way he touched her, the way he'd opened his heart to her in the darkness of that storm-torn night, she was beginning to believe he might be falling too. The ice around his heart was cracking, letting in light for the first time in 5 years. And Debbie was that light. Chapter 4. Dancing in the Moonlight. Some nights are ordinary, and some nights change everything. The trick is recognizing which is which before it's too late. The Priest estate had been transformed into something from a fairy tale, all glittering lights and whispered elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across marble floors, white roses cascaded from every surface like fallen stars, and the air hummed with the kind of anticipation that only comes before something magical. Debbie stood at her bedroom window, watching the preparation for Darren's annual charity gala unfold below. Staff members she'd never seen before moved like dancers across the grounds, setting up a stage in the garden and draping silk around anything that would hold still long enough. It was beautiful and intimidating in equal measure, a reminder that Darren's world was one of power and privilege, while hers was built on struggle and hope. "It's something, isn't it?" Georgetown appeared beside her, her arms full of fresh linens. "He throws this gala every year for the Elena Rosewood Foundation, Children's Cancer Research. She would have loved it. He named a foundation after her? 3 months after the funeral. Donated $50 million and hasn't stopped since. It's his way of keeping her memory alive while helping other families avoid what he couldn't prevent." Georgetown's voice was soft with pride. "That man has saved more lives than he'll ever admit." A knock at the door interrupted them. Langley Pentagon, Darren's devoted assistant, stood in the hallway looking harried and slightly desperate. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his tie was askew. "Ms. Bell, thank God, I need your help." "What's wrong?" "The event coordinator just called. Emergency appendectomy. She's in surgery and won't be available to oversee tonight's gala." Langley ran his hands through his hair. "We have 300 guests arriving in 4 hours, including senators, foreign dignitaries, and enough billionaires to fund a small country. Mr. Priest will have my head if this goes badly." "What do you need me to do?" "Everything," he said simply. "You've been watching the preparations all week. You know what she planned. I'll handle the technical details, but I need someone to coordinate the staff, make sure the timing runs smoothly, handle any crisis that comes up." Debbie's first instinct was to refuse. She was a housekeeper, not an event planner. But then she thought of Darren, of how much this foundation meant to him, of the children who would benefit from tonight's donations. "I'll do it." The next 4 hours passed in a whirlwind of organized chaos. Debbie found herself directing caterers, adjusting flower arrangements, and solving problems she never could have imagined. When the string quartet arrived with the wrong sheet music, she helped them transpose Elena's favorite songs from memory. When the ice sculpture began melting faster than expected, she coordinated a last-minute replacement. When 3 different senators' security details conflicted over parking arrangements, she diplomatically negotiated a solution that left everyone feeling important. Georgetown watched it all with growing amazement. "Where did you learn to do this?" "I didn't," Debbie replied, adjusting a centerpiece that had been knocked askew. "I'm just trying to think like someone who loved Darren enough to want everything perfect for him." As the first guests began arriving, Debbie retreated to her room to watch from her window. She'd planned to spend the evening reading, safely invisible while Darren's world played out below, but Georgetown had other ideas. "Oh, no, you don't," the older woman said, appearing in her doorway with something draped over her arm. "After what you've accomplished today, you're going to that gala." "Georgetown, I can't. I don't belong down there with those people. I'm the help. You're the woman who single-handedly saved this event, and more importantly, you're the woman who's been healing our boy's heart." Georgetown held up the garment she'd been carrying, and Debbie's breath caught. It was a gown fit for a princess, midnight blue silk that seemed to capture starlight in its folds. The neckline was elegant but modest, the waist fitted to perfection, and the skirt flowed like water. It was the most beautiful thing Debbie had ever seen. "This was mine," Georgetown said softly. "From back when I was young and foolish and dating a man above my station. I kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment, the right person. Tonight is that moment. You are that person. I couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will. That man down there has been half alive for 5 years, and you've given him back pieces of himself I thought were lost forever. Tonight he's going to see you as you really are, not his employee, not someone who works for him, but the extraordinary woman who's been brave enough to love him." An hour later, Debbie stood before her full-length mirror and barely recognized herself. The gown fit like it had been made for her, turning her curves into poetry and making her dark skin glow like burnished gold. Georgetown had swept her hair into an elegant updo that showcased the graceful line of her neck, and subtle makeup had enhanced her natural beauty without masking it. "You look like a queen," Georgetown whispered, her eyes bright with tears. Debbie felt like one. But more than that, she felt worthy. Worthy of the man whose heart she'd been slowly claiming. Worthy of the love she'd been afraid to name. The gala was in full swing when she made her entrance. The garden had been transformed into an outdoor ballroom, with twinkling lights strung between the trees and a dance floor that seemed to float on air. Guests in glittering gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos moved like beautiful predators through the night, their laughter mixing with the sound of champagne glasses and classical music. She spotted Darren immediately. He stood near the stage, devastatingly handsome in a black tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. He was speaking with an elderly senator, his smile polite but distant, going through the motions of charm while his heart remained carefully locked away. Then he saw her. Their eyes met across the crowded garden, and the world stopped. His conversation faltered mid-sentence as his gaze traveled from her face to the way the gown hugged her curves, then back to her eyes with an intensity that made her knees weak. She saw wonder there, and hunger, and something that looked dangerously like love. He excused himself from his conversation and moved toward her, cutting through the crowd like a man on a mission. Other guests turned to watch, women with speculative eyes and men with appreciative ones. But Debbie only had eyes for him. "You look—" he began when he reached her, then seemed to lose the ability to speak. "Different," she suggested, suddenly self-conscious. "Magnificent," he corrected, his voice rough with emotion. "Absolutely magnificent." Before she could respond, the band began playing a slow waltz, a melody hauntingly beautiful that seemed to call to the very soul. Darren extended his hand with old-world courtesy. "Would you honor me with a dance?" She placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses on his palms that spoke of a man who still worked with his hands despite his wealth. He led her away from the crowd, past the formal dance floor to a more secluded area of the garden where moonlight painted everything silver. "Here?" she asked. "Here," he confirmed, pulling her into his arms. "Where? It's just us." They began to move, and it was like they'd been dancing together all their lives. His hand was warm and sure on her waist, guiding her through steps that felt as natural as breathing. The music seemed to wrap around them, creating a bubble of intimacy in the midst of the grand celebration. "You saved tonight," he said, his voice soft in her ear. "Langley told me what you did, how you stepped in and made everything perfect. I just wanted it to be special for you, for Elena's memory." Something shifted in his expression, a softening that made her heart race. "Do you know what Elena would have said if she could see you tonight?" "What?" "She would have said you're exactly what I needed." His thumb traced along her spine, sending shivers of pleasure through her entire body. She would have been right. They danced in silence for a moment, lost in each other's eyes. The rest of the world had faded away. There were no guests, no expectations, no painful past or uncertain future. There was only this moment, this man, this perfect bubble of connection. "Debbie," he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like music. "Yes? I need you to know something." He pulled her closer until she could feel the warmth of his body through his tuxedo, could smell his intoxicating scent mixed with night-blooming jasmine. "These past weeks, you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope." His forehead touched hers, their breaths mingling in the moonlight. "Hope that maybe I can be more than my grief. Maybe I can be worthy of what? Of you." The words hung between them like a promise. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear of loving again warring with the need to be whole. Without thinking, she reached up to cup his face, her thumb tracing the sharp line of his cheekbone. "Darren," she breathed. He was leaning down, his lips a breath away from hers, when a voice cut through the night like a blade. "Well, well, isn't this intimate?" They sprang apart as if burned, turning toward the source of the interruption. A woman emerged from the shadows, tall, blonde, and beautiful in the way that suggested expensive maintenance. Her red dress was cut to perfection. Her jewelry could have funded a small nation, and her smile held all the warmth of Arctic wind. "Arlington," Darren said, his voice carefully neutral. "I didn't expect to see you here." Arlington Embassy moved toward them with predatory grace, her calculating eyes taking in every detail of Debbie's appearance. "Darling, you know I never miss your little charity events, though I must say the entertainment this year is interesting." The way she said entertainment made it clear she considered Debbie exactly that, a temporary amusement for a grieving man. "Arlington Embassy," Darren said formally. "Meet Debbie Bell." "Oh, I know exactly who she is," Arlington purred, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "The new housekeeper. Though I must say, Georgetown's uniform policy has certainly evolved." The insult was delicately delivered, but unmistakable. Debbie felt the magic of the evening draining away like water through her fingers. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Debbie said politely, refusing to let this woman see how deeply the barb had cut. "I'm sure it is." Arlington's smile could have frozen fire. "Darren, darling, we need to talk. About the Rosewood merger, among other matters. Privately." The way she said privately left no doubt that Debbie was being dismissed. But it was the name Rosewood that hit like a physical blow. Elena's family name. Whatever Arlington wanted to discuss, it involved Darren's dead fiancée. "Of course," Darren said, though something in his voice suggested reluctance. "Debbie, would you excuse us?" She wanted to say no, wanted to fight for the moment they'd been building, for the words he'd been about to speak, for the kiss that had been trembling between them like a butterfly waiting to land. But she was still the housekeeper, still the woman who didn't belong in this glittering world, and Arlington Embassy was clearly someone who did. "Of course," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Thank you for the dance." She walked away with her head high, feeling Arlington's triumphant gaze burning into her back. Behind her, she heard the other woman's laugh, musical and cold as winter wind. "Really, Darren," Arlington was saying as Debbie retreated toward the house. "She's lovely, I'm sure, but don't you think Elena deserves better than to have her memory replaced by the hired help?" Debbie didn't wait to hear his response. She couldn't bear to. As she climbed the stairs to her room, the beautiful gown suddenly felt like a costume she had no right to wear. The magic of the evening had shattered like spun glass, leaving only the painful reminder that fairy tales were called tales for a reason. Outside her window, the gala continued without her, and she wondered if she'd imagined the love she'd thought she'd seen in Darren's eyes. Perhaps Arlington was right. Perhaps she was just entertainment, a temporary distraction for a man still devoted to a ghost. But even as doubt poisoned her thoughts, she couldn't forget the way he'd held her, the way her name had sounded like a prayer on his lips, the way he'd looked at her like she was his salvation. Some cracks in the ice, she told herself, were worth the risk of drowning, even if it meant her heart might break in the process. Chapter 5. The Weight of Secrets. Truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds when you've forgotten what warmth feels like. The morning after the gala dawned grey and subdued, as if the sky itself was mourning the magic that had been interrupted. Debbie stood in her simple uniform again, the midnight blue gown hanging in her closet like a beautiful dream. She wasn't sure she'd really lived. The memory of Darren's arms around her, the words he'd almost spoken, felt fragile as spun glass in the harsh light of day. She'd barely slept, replaying Arlington Embassy's cutting words and the way Darren had let himself be led away. By dawn, she'd convinced herself that the moment in the garden had been nothing more than moonlight and wishful thinking, a fantasy born of loneliness and hope. Georgetown found her in the kitchen, mechanically preparing breakfast with the hollow efficiency of someone trying not to think. The older woman took one look at her red-rimmed eyes and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Oh, honey, what did that viper do to you?" "Nothing I shouldn't have expected," Debbie said, her voice carefully steady. "She reminded me of my place. I'm grateful, really. Better to know now than to keep dreaming impossible dreams." "Impossible?" Georgetown stepped back, her eyes flashing with something dangerous. Child, there's nothing impossible about love, and that man is head over heels in love with you, even if he's too scared to admit it." Before Debbie could argue, Langley Pentagon burst through the kitchen doors looking like he'd been chased by demons. His usually impeccable appearance was disheveled, his hair wild and his tie hanging loose around his neck. "Where is he?" Langley demanded. "Where's Mr. Preece?" "In his study, I assume," Georgetown replied. "What's wrong?" "Fairfax Supreme is here, with documents, legal documents about Elena's estate that were apparently sealed by court order." Langley ran his hands through his hair. "He says it's time Mr. Preece knew the truth about the accident." The blood drained from Debbie's face. "What truth?" "I don't know, but Fairfax looked like he was attending a funeral. Whatever's in those files, it's going to destroy what's left of Mr. Preece's peace of mind." Without thinking, Debbie stripped off her apron and headed for the stairs. Georgetown caught her arm. "Where are you going?" "To be with him. He shouldn't face this alone." "But no." Debbie's voice was firm, her brown eyes blazing with determination. "I don't care about propriety or class differences or anything else. That man upstairs is hurting, and he needs someone who loves him to hold his hand while his world falls apart." Again, Georgetown smiled through her tears. "There's my fierce girl. Go to him." Debbie climbed the stairs 2 at a time, her heart hammering against her ribs. The study door was closed, but she could hear voices inside, Darren's low baritone and another man's careful legal tones. She knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission. Darren sat behind his massive mahogany desk like a king under siege, his face pale and his hands clenched into fists. Across from him sat a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind but weary eyes, obviously Fairfax Supreme, the family lawyer who'd been carrying secrets for 5 years. Both men looked up when she entered. Fairfax's eyebrows rose in polite surprise, but Darren's expression was unreadable. "Ms. Bell," Darren said carefully, "this is a private meeting." "I know." She moved to stand beside his chair, her hand coming to rest on his shoulder. "But you don't have to face private pain alone anymore." For a moment, she thought he would ask her to leave. Then his hand came up to cover hers, his fingers intertwining with hers like he was drowning and she was his lifeline. "Fairfax Supreme, meet Debbie Bell," Darren said quietly. "Debbie, this is the man who's been keeping Elena's secrets for longer than anyone should have to." Fairfax studied her with the keen eyes of someone who'd spent decades reading people. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded slowly. "Ms. Bell, I'm glad you're here. What I'm about to tell Mr. Preece, well, it's the kind of truth that changes everything. He'll need someone who cares about him to help process it." "What truth?" Darren asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Fairfax opened the thick folder he'd brought and pulled out a medical report. His hands shook slightly as he placed it on the desk. The autopsy report on Elena, the real one, not the preliminary findings that were released to the family. Darren's grip on Debbie's hand tightened until it was almost painful. "What do you mean, the real one?" "Elena didn't die from injuries sustained in the car accident," Fairfax said gently. "She suffered a massive brain aneurysm, a congenital defect that had existed since birth. It ruptured while you were driving, causing her to lose consciousness instantly. That's why she couldn't respond when you tried to wake her after the crash. She was already gone." The silence in the room was deafening. Debbie felt Darren's whole body go rigid, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "What are you saying?" Darren's voice was barely human. "I'm saying the accident didn't kill her, son. The aneurysm did. Even if you'd been sitting safely at home, even if she'd been in the best hospital in the world, surrounded by the finest doctors, she would have died. There was nothing anyone could have done. Debbie watched the color drain completely from Darren's face as the words sank in. 5 years of guilt, 5 years of self-imposed exile, 5 years of believing he was a murderer, all built on a lie. But she was talking to me. She said my name right before the aneurysm ruptured, yes. The medical examiner estimates she died within seconds of losing consciousness. She felt no pain from the crash, Mr. Priest. She was already at peace. Darren's hands began to shake. Why didn't you tell me this 5 years ago? Fairfax's face crumpled with old regret. Elena's father requested the report be sealed. He was dealing with his own grief and guilt. He knew about the family history of aneurysms, but never told Elena because he didn't want her to live in fear. When she died, he couldn't bear the thought of you knowing that he'd essentially condemned his daughter to death by keeping silent. So he let me believe I killed her instead, Darren said, his voice hollow. He thought it would be easier for you to blame yourself for a tragic accident than to blame him for a genetic time bomb. He was wrong, obviously. But grief makes people do incomprehensible things. Debbie felt tears streaming down her face as she watched the man she loved grapple with this earth-shattering revelation. All those nights of nightmares, all that self-imposed isolation, all that beautiful life wasted on guilt that was never his to carry. She was dying anyway, Darren whispered, more to himself than to them. All this time, she was dying anyway. Yes, Fairfax confirmed gently. And according to the doctors who reviewed the case, she died peacefully. No pain, no fear. One moment she was with the man she loved, the next she was simply gone. Something broke in Darren then, not the shattering of more pain, but the cracking open of a prison he'd built around his own heart. He buried his face in his hands and wept, but these tears were different from the ones Debbie had witnessed during the storm. These were tears of release, of 5 years of agony finally flowing out of him like poison from a wound. Debbie knelt beside his chair, wrapping her arms around him as he sobbed. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's okay to let it go now. It was never your fault. It was never your fault." Fairfax quietly gathered his papers and slipped from the room, leaving them alone with the truth that had finally set them free. When the tears finally stopped, Darren lifted his head to look at her. His eyes were red and swollen, but for the first time since she'd known him, they weren't haunted. The shadows that had lived there for 5 years were finally lifting. "I'm not a murderer," he said wonderingly, as if testing the words. "You never were," she replied firmly. "You were just a man who loved someone so much that you'd rather carry the weight of the world than let her memory suffer." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the tears on her cheeks. "Do you know what this means?" "What?" "It means I'm free to love again, free to love you." Before she could respond, his lips found hers in a kiss that tasted of salt and redemption and promises yet to be made. It was soft at first, tentative, as if he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to have this. But when she kissed him back with all the love she'd been hiding in her heart, he deepened it, pouring 5 years of pent-up emotion into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered, the words falling between them like benedictions. "God help me, I think I've loved you since that first night when you saw straight through all my walls and refused to be afraid of what you found." "I love you too," she replied, her voice breaking with the beauty of finally being able to say it. "I've been trying not to fall for weeks, but you made it impossible. The way you hide your kindness, the way you carry other people's pain, the way you see beauty in everything except yourself. How could I not love you?" He kissed her again, harder this time, with the desperate hunger of a man who'd been starving for years and finally found sustenance. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. "Marry me," he said against her lips, the words tumbling out like they'd been waiting years to be spoken. "What?" She pulled back to stare at him, sure she'd misheard. "Marry me," he repeated, his voice stronger now, more certain. "I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but Debbie, you saved my life. You brought me back from the dead. I don't want to waste another day pretending I don't need you like I need air to breathe." "Darren, I know I'm damaged goods. I know I come with enough baggage to sink a ship. But I also know that I've never felt for anyone, not even Elena, what I feel for you. You don't just complete me, you make me better than I ever dreamed of being." She looked into his eyes and saw her future there. Not perfect, perhaps, but real and beautiful and worth fighting for. This man who'd been broken by loss and healed by love, who'd learned to trust again because she'd been brave enough to love him through his darkness. "Yes," she whispered, watching joy transform his face into something radiant. "Yes, I'll marry you." He spun her around, both of them laughing through their tears, and she realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories weren't about perfect people finding each other. They were about broken people choosing to heal together, choosing to build something new from the ashes of what came before. Outside the study windows, the grey sky was finally beginning to clear, letting the first rays of sunshine through in what felt like forever. Like hope, Debbie thought as Darren kissed her again. Like love, finally coming home. Chapter 6. Love in Full Bloom. Love in its truest form doesn't whisper. It sings, it soars, it paints the world in colors you never knew existed. The engagement ring caught the morning light like captured starfire, sending rainbow prisms dancing across the ceiling of Debbie's room. 3 days had passed since Darren's proposal, 3 days since the truth about Eleanor had set them both free, and Debbie still couldn't quite believe this was her life now. The ring itself was a masterpiece, a vintage Art Deco setting with a cushion-cut diamond surrounded by sapphires that matched Darren's eyes. But it wasn't the monetary value that took her breath away. It was the story behind it. "It belonged to my grandmother," he'd told her when he slipped it onto her finger. She was a suffragette who married for love, in an age when women of her class married for duty. "I always said I'd only give this ring to someone who reminded me of her strength." Now, as she watched the sunlight play across the band, Debbie felt the weight of that legacy, the responsibility of being loved by a man who'd thought he'd never love again. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. "Come in," she called, expecting Georgetown with breakfast. Instead, Darren himself appeared in her doorway, devastatingly handsome in dark jeans and a cream cashmere sweater that made his eyes look like Arctic ice. He carried a breakfast tray laden with fresh croissants, exotic fruits, and coffee that smelled like heaven. "Room service," he announced, with a smile that could have powered the entire East Coast. "You don't have to bring me breakfast in bed," she protested, even as her heart melted at the gesture. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of everyone but yourself," he finished, setting the tray on her nightstand and settling beside her on the massive bed. "Which is exactly why I'm taking care of you now." He fed her strawberries with his fingers, each bite an exercise in sensual torture that made her blood sing. When juice ran down her chin, he leaned forward to kiss it away, his lips warm and soft against her skin. "Darren," she breathed, her voice already husky with desire. "I love the way you say my name," he murmured against her throat, pressing kisses along the graceful line of her neck. "Like it's something precious." "It is precious. You are precious." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes dark with emotion. "I have something for you. Besides breakfast. You don't need to give me anything else. You've already given me everything. This is different." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, different from the ring box, older somehow. This belonged to Eleanor. Debbie's breath caught. "Darren, I can't." "Yes, you can." His voice was gentle but firm. "She would have wanted you to have it. Before she died, Elena made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I wouldn't let grief destroy me. She said she wanted me to love again, to be happy again. This is her blessing on what we have." With trembling fingers, Debbie opened the box to reveal a delicate gold locket, its surface engraved with two intertwined hearts. It was beautiful and timeless, the kind of piece that carried stories through generations. "She wore it every day," Darren said softly. "Her grandmother gave it to her with the same words I'm giving it to you. Love is the only legacy that truly matters." Tears blurred Debbie's vision as he fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting me with this, for trusting me with your heart." "You've earned both," he replied simply. "Now finish your breakfast. We have plans today." "What kind of plans?" His smile was mysterious and boyish, reminding her of the man he must have been before grief aged him. "You'll see." An hour later, they were in his sleek black Bentley, racing through the Virginia countryside with the windows down and music playing. Darren drove with one hand on the wheel and the other holding hers, occasionally bringing their joined fingers to his lips for quick kisses that made her heart stutter. "Where are we going?" she asked, for the 10th time. "Patience, my love. We're almost there." The endearment sent warmth spiraling through her chest. She'd never get tired of hearing him call her his love, never stop marveling that she was allowed to have this man, this happiness, this beautiful beginning. Their destination turned out to be a private airfield where a helicopter waited, its pilot already performing pre-flight checks. Debbie stared at the sleek aircraft with a mixture of excitement and terror. "Please tell me you're not planning to fly that yourself," she said. Darren laughed, the sound rich and free. "I'm many things, but I'm not a pilot. That honor belongs to Captain Martinez, who's been flying me around for 8 years without a single incident." The helicopter ride was both terrifying and magical, lifting them above the world until everything below looked like a miniature landscape painted by the gods. Darren pointed out landmarks as they flew. His office building in downtown D.C., the Potomac River, winding like a silver ribbon through the countryside. And finally, their destination. "A vineyard?" Debbie asked as they landed in a field surrounded by rolling hills covered in grapevines. "Not just any vineyard," Darren replied, helping her down from the aircraft. "This is where I want to marry you." The venue was breathtaking, a family-owned winery with a stone farmhouse that looked like it had been transplanted from Tuscany. The owner, a warm Italian woman named Sophia, greeted them like old friends and walked them through gardens that seemed designed by angels. "We could have the ceremony here," Sophia said, gesturing to a natural amphitheater formed by ancient oak trees. The reception in the vineyard itself, with lights strung between the vines. Very romantic, very magical. "What do you think?" Darren asked Debbie, but she was speechless. It was perfect, rustic but elegant, intimate but grand, the kind of place where fairy tale weddings actually happened. "I think," she said slowly, "that Eleanor would have loved it." His smile was radiant. She would have. She loved places where you could feel the history in the stones, where generations of love had blessed the ground. They spent the afternoon planning their wedding, a small intimate affair with just family and close friends, no society photographers, no 6-course meals designed to impress, just love, pure and simple, surrounded by the people who mattered most. "I want to meet your sister," Darren said as they flew home, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. and your best friend. Anyone who's important to you is important to me." "They're going to love you," Debbie replied, though privately she worried about the opposite. Would Bethesda and Alexandria Potomac think she was moving too fast? Would they see Darren as a rebound from grief rather than the love of her life? "And I want you to meet Montgomery's family and Georgetown's grandchildren and all the people who've been my family when blood relatives failed me." His voice grew serious. "I want to build something with you, Debbie. Not just a marriage, but a life. A real life with Sunday dinners and anniversary traditions, and maybe someday—" He trailed off, suddenly shy. "Maybe someday what?" "Children," he said softly. "I know it's presumptuous to assume you want them, but I can't help imagining a little girl with your eyes and your fierce heart, or a boy with your compassion and stubborn streak." The image hit her like a physical blow. Beautiful children with Darren's intelligence and her determination, raised in love and security, never knowing the kind of struggle she'd fought through her whole life. "I want that too," she whispered. "All of it. Everything with you." That evening, they hosted their first dinner party as an engaged couple. Alexandria Potomac and Bethesda came from the city, along with Montgomery Capital and his wife Celeste, Georgetown and her daughter River, and Langley Pentagon with his partner James. Debbie had been nervous about the mixing of their worlds, but she needn't have worried. Darren charmed her sister with stories about the Foundation's work with children's hospitals, and won over Alexandria by asking intelligent questions about her job as a social worker. By the end of the evening, even skeptical Bethesda was calling him Big Brother and making him promise to walk her down the aisle at her own future wedding. "He's perfect for you," Alexandria whispered as they cleared dishes in the kitchen. "I've never seen you so happy, so radiant. You're glowing like you swallowed the sun." "I feel like I did," Debbie replied, watching through the window as Darren helped Bethesda with her physical therapy exercises. Her sister had been weakened by her illness, but Darren was infinitely patient, encouraging her through each movement with the same gentle strength he'd shown Debbie during her own vulnerable moments. "When's the wedding?" Bethesda asked later as Darren drove them back to the city. 2 weeks, Debbie replied. "We don't want to wait." "Good," her sister said firmly. "Life's too short to waste time when you find something real." But even as happiness surrounded them like golden light, shadows were gathering that none of them could see. In a glass tower downtown, Rockville Senate was studying photographs taken by a private investigator, images of Darren and Debbie at the vineyard, holding hands as they planned their future. "So," Rockville said to his assistant, his voice cold as winter, "the grieving billionaire has found himself a new obsession. How convenient. What do you want to do about it, sir?" Rockville's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Nothing. Yet. But love makes people vulnerable, and vulnerable people make mistakes. When they do, I'll be ready." The photographs went into a file labeled insurance policy, and the file went into a safe that contained the secrets powerful men used to destroy each other. Because Rockville Senate hadn't built his empire by playing fair, and he wasn't about to let Darren Priest's happiness stand in the way of his ambitions. Love might conquer all, but money and power had their own ways of winning wars. The storm clouds were gathering, even if the lovers were too blinded by happiness to see them coming. But for now, in the sanctuary of Darren's estate, with wedding plans scattered across the dining room table and the future stretching before them like an endless summer day, they were invincible. Or so they believed. Chapter 7. When the world turns against us. Sometimes love's greatest test isn't whether you can weather the storm together, but whether you're brave enough to face the hurricane alone. The scandal erupted like a bomb detonating in their perfect world, shattering everything beautiful they'd built with the precision of a master demolition expert. Debbie woke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly against the nightstand, the screen lit up with dozens of missed calls and text messages that made her blood turn to ice. The first headline made her stomach drop. Billionaire's desperate rebound. Tech mogul Darren Preece engaged to former housekeeper months after tragic fiancé's death. The second made her hands shake. From servant to socialite, gold digger's guide to landing a grieving billionaire. The third made her want to disappear entirely. Exclusive photos, Preece's Cinderella story or calculated con game. The images splashed across every tabloid and gossip website were intimate moments stolen and twisted into poison, their helicopter trip to the vineyard captioned as expensive bribes, their engagement dinner labeled as introducing the help to high society, their tender moments in the garden described as manipulation tactics of a fortune hunter. Her phone rang again. Alexandria Potomac's name flashed on the screen. "Debbie, honey, don't look at social media," her best friend said the moment she answered. "Don't read the comments. Don't watch the news segments. Just breathe." "Too late," Debbie whispered, her voice hollow. "I've seen enough. They're calling me a predator, Alex. They're saying I seduced a grieving man for his money. Anyone who knows you knows that's garbage. But Darren's board doesn't know me. His investors don't know me. The whole world is seeing these headlines and thinking—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Georgetown burst into her room without knocking, her usually serene face flushed with fury. "That snake," she spat. "That absolute viper." "Arlington," Debbie guessed. "She's giving interviews to anyone with a camera, talking about how concerned she is for Darren's mental state, how grief can make men vulnerable to manipulation, and how someone needs to protect him from making decisions he'll regret." Georgetown's hands clenched into fists. "I've never wanted to throttle someone so badly in my life." Debbie's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. You need to see this. A friend." The email contained a video link. Arlington Embassy on the morning news, looking perfectly composed in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Debbie's yearly salary. The interviewer was hanging on her every word. "Darren is like a brother to me," Arlington was saying, her voice dripping with false concern. "I've known him since we were children, and I've watched him struggle with Elena's death for 5 years. To see him rushing into an engagement with someone who, well, let's just say someone whose motives might not be entirely pure. It breaks my heart." "Are you suggesting Ms. Bell is only interested in Mr. Preece's money?" Arlington's smile was poison wrapped in silk. "I'm suggesting that a man in his emotional state needs protection from those who might take advantage of his vulnerability. Darren is worth billions, and some people will do anything for that kind of security." The interviewer leaned forward conspiratorially. "Sources close to the family suggest Miss Bell was specifically seeking employment at the Preece estate, that this relationship might have been calculated from the beginning." "I couldn't possibly comment on that," Arlington replied, her tone suggesting she could comment extensively. "But I will say that Elena was the love of Darren's life. Their relationship was built over years of shared history, common values, and genuine compatibility. This situation seems to be moving remarkably fast for a man who spent 5 years in mourning." Debbie's hands shook as she closed the laptop. Every word was designed to plant seeds of doubt, to make the world, and maybe Darren himself, question whether their love was real. A soft knock made her look up. Darren stood in her doorway, his face pale and his eyes dark with fury. He held a tablet displaying the morning's headlines, his knuckles white where he gripped the device. "I've called my legal team," he said without preamble. "We're suing every publication that's printed lies about you. I've also had Langley trace the leak The photos, the inside sources, all of it. And his jaw clenched. Rockville Senate? He hired private investigators to follow us, fed information to journalists, even paid Arlington to give that interview this morning. Why? Debbie felt sick. Why would he do this to us? Because I refused to sell him my tech patents last year, because he's been trying to destroy my company for months and failing, because he knows that attacking you is the surest way to hurt me. Darren's voice was deadly quiet. He's using our love as a weapon. Georgetown cleared her throat diplomatically. I'll leave you two to talk. But remember, this too shall pass. Love like yours doesn't break under pressure. It gets stronger. When they were alone, Darren set down the tablet and pulled Debbie into his arms. She melted against him, drawing strength from his solid warmth. But even his embrace couldn't stop the poison of doubt from spreading through her veins. The board called an emergency meeting, he said softly. Stock prices are dropping because investors are worried about my judgment. There's talk of a hostile takeover if I don't stabilize the situation. What does that mean? It means they want me to end our engagement, publicly distance myself from you to restore confidence in my leadership. Debbie pulled back to look at him, her heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. Maybe they're right. Maybe this is moving too fast. Maybe... Don't! His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize were falling. Don't let them make you doubt what we have. I love you, Debbie Bell. Not your bank account, not your social status, not what you can do for my reputation. You, just you. But your company can burn to the ground for all I care. You think I give a damn about money when I almost lost you to grief and guilt? You think stock prices matter more than the woman who saved my soul? Before she could respond, Langley appeared in the doorway, his face grim. Sir, we have a problem. Reporters are gathering at the front gates. Security is holding them back, but they're asking for statements, photos, anything they can use to keep this story alive. Get them off my property. We're trying, but they're on public land. And, sir, there's something else. Langley's voice dropped. Someone leaked Ms. Bell's personal information. Her old address, her sister's medical records, even her employment history. The vultures are circling everyone she's ever known. Debbie's blood turned to ice. Bethesda. They're going after Bethesda. Her phone rang immediately, as if summoned by her fear. Bethesda's name appeared on the screen, but when Debbie answered, her sister's voice was small and frightened. Debbie? There are people outside my apartment, reporters with cameras, asking questions about you and Mr. Priest. They're saying terrible things, offering money for dirt on your relationship. I'm scared. Lock your doors, Debbie said immediately. Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming to get you. No. Darren's voice was firm. You're not going anywhere near those vultures. Langley, send a security team to collect Miss DuPont. Bring her here where she'll be safe. And Alexandria? Debbie asked. Anyone you care about gets protection, Darren replied without hesitation. I'll bankrupt myself before I let them hurt people you love. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls, security arrangements, and damage control. Darren's legal team worked around the clock to combat the lies, but for every false story they killed, 2 more sprang up to take its place. The internet had turned their love story into a feeding frenzy, and truth was irrelevant when speculation sold more papers. By evening, Bethesda and Alexandria were safe at the estate, but the cost was becoming clear. Darren's company stock had dropped 15%. 3 major investors had pulled out of upcoming deals. The board was in emergency session, discussing options that ranged from forced resignation to complete restructuring. This is my fault, Debbie said as they sat in his study, watching the news coverage that painted her as everything from a calculating gold digger to a home-wrecking opportunist. If I hadn't come here, if I hadn't fallen in love with you, then I'd still be half dead, Darren interrupted. living in this beautiful mausoleum, too broken to remember what happiness felt like. You gave me back my life, Debbie. I won't let anyone make me apologize for that. But at what cost? Your company, your reputation, everything you've built can be rebuilt. But you... He turned to face her fully, his eyes blazing with intensity. You're irreplaceable. What we have is irreplaceable. I'd rather lose everything else than lose you. A soft knock interrupted them. Montgomery Capital entered, his usually cheerful face grave with concern. The board voted, he announced without preamble. They're demanding your resignation as CEO unless you publicly end the engagement within 48 hours. Let them demand, Darren replied coldly. I built that company from nothing. I can do it again. Darren, be realistic. Rockville Senate is orchestrating a hostile takeover. If you don't give the board what they want, they'll side with him. You'll lose everything. The company, the foundation, even this house. Then I'll lose it all. Darren's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. But I won't lose her. Montgomery's expression softened. I know you love her. We all do. But maybe there's another way. A strategic retreat until this blows over. No. Debbie stood abruptly, her decision crystallizing like ice in her chest. No, there's only one way to stop this. Both men turned to stare at her, and she saw the exact moment Darren realized what she was thinking. Don't, he said, his voice rough with panic. Don't even think about it. It's the only way, she said softly, her heart breaking even as she spoke the words. As long as we're together, they'll keep attacking. As long as I'm here, your life will be under siege. But if I leave, I'll come after you. If I leave and make it clear that I'm the one ending this, that I was overwhelmed by the pressure and decided I wasn't ready for this life. She swallowed hard. They'll paint me as a coward instead of a gold digger. You'll look like the victim instead of the fool. Your reputation can recover. I don't care about my reputation. But I care about you, she replied, tears streaming down her face. I care about your company, your foundation, all the good you do in this world. I won't be the reason it all gets destroyed. Debbie, please. I love you, she said, the words torn from her soul. I love you so much that I'm willing to walk away to protect you. That's the measure of how much I love you. She was already moving toward the door, knowing that if she stayed another moment, her resolve would crumble completely. If you leave, Darren called after her, his voice breaking, you take my heart with you. Then I'll guard it with my life, she whispered without turning around, until it's safe for us to be together again. But even as she said the words, she wondered if that day would ever come. Love might be worth fighting for, but sometimes the bravest thing you could do was surrender, even when surrender felt like dying, especially then. Chapter 8. The Darkness Before Dawn. The cruelest kind of darkness is the one that comes after you've tasted light, when you know exactly what you're missing and every breath reminds you of what you've lost. 3 weeks, 21 days, 504 hours since Debbie Bell walked out of Darren Preece's life to save it, and every second felt like a blade twisting in his chest. The Preece estate had never felt more like a mausoleum. Darren wandered its halls like a spectre, haunting his own existence, moving from room to room without purpose, eating meals he couldn't taste, attending meetings where words flowed around him like meaningless noise. The board had been satisfied with the amicable separation, stock prices had stabilized, and Rockville Senate's hostile takeover had been thwarted. Everyone thought he'd won. Everyone was wrong. Sir? Langley Pentagon appeared in the doorway of the study, his voice carefully neutral. The quarterly reports are ready for your review. Darren didn't look up from the window where he'd been staring at the garden for the past hour. The roses were blooming, the same roses Debbie had tended with such care, the same ones she'd cut for his desk every morning. Now they mocked him with their beauty, reminding him of hands that would never touch them again. "Sir, cancel the rest of my meetings," Darren said finally. "I'm not fit for human company today." Langley's face softened with concern. "Perhaps you should call her, just to check." "She made her choice." The words came out sharper than intended, but Darren couldn't soften them. If he acknowledged how much he missed her, how every breath hurt without her, he'd break completely. "She decided I wasn't worth the fight." "That's not—" "Leave me alone, Langley." When his assistant had gone, Darren finally allowed himself to slump forward, his head in his hands. The ring box sat on his desk where it had lived for 3 weeks. The engagement ring she'd left behind along with Elena's locket and a letter that had nearly destroyed him. "My darling Darren, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Please don't think this means I love you any less. I'm leaving because I love you too much to watch them destroy everything you've built. You gave me the most beautiful weeks of my life. You showed me what it meant to be cherished, to be seen, to be loved for exactly who I am. I will carry that gift forever, even if I can never share it with you again. Take care of yourself, build something beautiful, find happiness, even if it can't be with me. All my love, always. Debbie." The roses need extra water in this heat. Don't let Georgetown forget. Even in her goodbye, she'd been taking care of him. Across town, in a cramped studio apartment that felt like exile after the grandeur of the estate, Debbie Bell was learning that a broken heart was a physical thing, something that lived in your chest and made every movement ache. She'd found work at a small non-profit, helping families navigate the healthcare system, and threw herself into the job with desperate intensity. But no amount of purpose could fill the Darren-shaped hole in her soul. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters wanting interviews, producers offering book deals, and tabloid journalists fishing for exclusive details about her relationship with the billionaire. She ignored them all, just as she ignored the packages that arrived daily at her door, flowers, jewelry, handwritten pleas from Darren begging her to come home. She couldn't go back. Not when she knew her presence would destroy everything he'd worked for. "You look terrible," Alexandria Potomac announced, letting herself into the apartment with the spare key Debbie had given her. "When's the last time you ate something that wasn't coffee?" "I'm fine." "You're wasting away. And before you argue, yes, I know why you left. I understand the sacrifice you think you're making. But honey, you're both miserable. Better miserable than responsible for his ruin." Alexandria set down a bag of takeout that smelled like heaven and fixed Debbie with a look that could have cut glass. "Has it occurred to you that maybe he'd rather be ruined with you than successful without you? He'll get over it. He's stronger than he thinks." "And what about you? Will you get over him?" Debbie's composure finally cracked. "I don't want to get over him," she whispered. "I want to wake up in his arms and watch him smile at my terrible jokes and fight with him about which movie to watch. I want to grow old with him and have his babies and argue about whose turn it is to walk the dog we don't even have yet. Then why are you here instead of there? Because love isn't always enough." The words exploded out of her. "Because sometimes loving someone means letting them go, even when it kills you. Because I won't be the reason he loses everything he's worked for." Alexandria was quiet for a long moment. "What if I told you there might be another way?" Meanwhile, across the city, Montgomery Capital was having a similar conversation with his best friend. He'd found Darren in the conservatory at 3 a.m., sitting at the piano bench, but not playing, just staring at keys that hadn't made music since Elena's death. "This has to stop," Montgomery said without preamble. "The brooding, the isolation, the whole tragic hero routine. It's been 3 weeks, Darren. 3 weeks of watching you die a little more each day. I'm not dying, I'm functioning. Barely. You've lost weight, you haven't slept, and according to Georgetown, you're living on coffee and stubbornness. Montgomery sat beside him on the bench. She was right to leave, you know. Darren's head snapped up. What? Not because she doesn't love you. Anyone with eyes can see that woman is crazy about you, but because staying would have destroyed you both. The pressure, the scrutiny, the constant attacks, it would have poisoned what you had. So I should just accept it. Let her sacrifice herself for my comfort? Number. You should fix the real problem. Which is? Montgomery's smile was sharp as a blade. Rockville Senate. The man who orchestrated this whole mess because he wanted to hurt you. I can't prove that. Actually, you can. Montgomery pulled out a thick folder. Fairfax Supreme has been investigating. Turns out our friend Rockville has been very careless with his illegal activities. Bribery, extortion, wire fraud, enough to put him away for decades. Darren's eyes sharpened. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves he paid journalists to lie about Debbie, hired private investigators to stalk you both, and even bought Arlington's cooperation with promises of funding her failing art gallery. Financial records, recorded phone calls, digital receipts for everything. Why is Fairfax telling us this instead of the FBI? Because he wanted to give you first shot at revenge. Rockville tried to destroy your happiness. Fairfax thinks you should have the honor of destroying him. For the first time in weeks, Darren smiled. What did you have in mind? The plan they hatched was elegant in its simplicity. They would expose Rockville's crimes publicly, destroying his reputation and business empire while clearing Debbie's name. The evidence would show the world that she'd been an innocent victim of a powerful man's revenge scheme, not a calculating gold digger. Once the truth comes out, Montgomery explained, public opinion will shift. You'll go from billionaire fool to man whose love was weaponized against him. Debbie becomes the brave woman who sacrificed her happiness to protect you. It's actually pretty romantic. Will it work? It'll work. But more importantly, it'll give you both the chance to choose each other without the weight of the world on your shoulders. Meanwhile, Alexandria was working the same angle from her end. I've been in touch with Montgomery Capital, she told Debbie over dinner. They have a plan to clear your name and expose the real villain in this story. What kind of plan? The kind that proves you're not a gold digger, just a woman who fell in love with a man powerful people wanted to hurt. The kind that makes you a hero instead of a villain. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in Debbie's chest. And then you can choose each other freely. No external pressure, no manufactured scandal. Just two people deciding whether their love is worth building a life on. What if it's too late? What if he's moved on? Alexandria laughed softly. Honey, have you seen the pictures? That man looks like he's attending his own funeral every day. He hasn't moved on. He's barely existing at all. They set the plan in motion the next morning. Fairfax Supreme would deliver the evidence to federal prosecutors while simultaneously releasing key documents to trusted journalists. By evening, the real story would dominate front-page news, and by morning, Rockville Senate would be in handcuffs. Darren spent the day in nervous preparation, writing a speech he planned to deliver once the truth came out, words that would hopefully convince Debbie to come home where she belonged. He had flowers delivered to her apartment, not the elaborate arrangements he'd been sending, but simple daisies because she'd once mentioned they were her favorite. Everything was ready. The evidence was compiled, the journalists were briefed, and the FBI was standing by. Tomorrow, their nightmare would be over. That's when Debbie's phone rang. Debbie Bell? The voice was unfamiliar, carefully neutral. Speaking. You need to come to Warehouse District Pier 47 immediately. Come alone and don't call anyone. I'm sorry, Who is this? Someone who has your sister. The blood drained from Debbie's face. What? Bethesda DuPont. Pretty girl, recovering from surgery. She's safe for now, but that could change very quickly if you don't follow instructions. If you hurt her, whether she gets hurt depends entirely on you. Pier 47, 1 hour, come alone or she dies. And Ms. Bell, when you arrive, you'll be signing a sworn statement about your relationship with Darren Preece. A statement that confirms you manipulated a grieving man for financial gain, refuse, and your sister pays the price. The line went dead. Debbie stared at the phone with shaking hands, her mind racing. Bethesda had been staying with friends, trying to recover from the media circus while finishing her physical therapy. Someone had taken her, was using her as leverage to force a confession that would destroy Darren permanently. She thought about calling him, about calling the police, about calling anyone who could help. But the voice had been clear. Come alone or Bethesda dies. 30 minutes later, she was driving toward the warehouse district with tears streaming down her face and a heart full of despair. Just when hope had returned, just when freedom had seemed possible, the nightmare was starting all over again. And this time, she might lose more than just the man she loved. This time, she might lose everything. Chapter 9. Fighting for Forever. The measure of love isn't how far you'll go for someone when the path is easy. It's how many walls you'll tear down with your bare hands when everything you hold dear is threatened. Darren was reviewing the final evidence package when Georgetown burst into his study, her face white with terror and her silver hair disheveled from running. "He took her!" she gasped, clutching the doorframe for support. "That monster took Bethesda!" The blood in Darren's veins turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" Alexandria just called. Bethesda was walking home from physical therapy when a black van pulled up. 3 men grabbed her off the street in broad daylight. Georgetown's voice broke. Alexandria tried calling Debbie to warn her, but her phone goes straight to voicemail. Darren was already reaching for his phone, dialing Debbie's number with hands that shook with barely controlled fury. When it went to voicemail, he tried again, and again. "Sir?" Langley Pentagon appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. "What's happening?" "Rockville has Bethesda," Darren said, his voice deadly calm in the way that meant volcanic rage lurked beneath the surface. "And Debbie isn't answering her phone." Understanding dawned in Langley's eyes. He's using the sister as leverage, forcing Debbie to sign something that incriminates her. Or worse. Darren was already moving, grabbing his coat and car keys. "Call Montgomery. Tell him to bring the FBI evidence to Warehouse District immediately. Call Alexandria and get Bethesda's last known location and get me a GPS trace on Debbie's phone, now." "Sir, if this is a trap, then I'm walking into it willingly." Darren's blue eyes blazed with a fire that could have melted steel. "No one threatens my family. No one." 15 minutes later, Darren's Bentley tore through the Virginia countryside like a missile seeking its target. Montgomery sat in the passenger seat, a briefcase full of evidence in his lap, and a phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with federal agents. "FBI is en route," Montgomery reported, "but they're 20 minutes out. GPS shows Debbie's phone at Pier 47 in the warehouse district." "We're not waiting for backup." "Darren, be reasonable. If Rockville's desperate enough to kidnap someone, then every second we delay is another second that woman suffers for my sins." Darren's hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. "I let Debbie sacrifice herself to protect me once. I won't do it again." They reached the warehouse district as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson that looked like warnings written in fire. Pier 47 sat at the end of a row of abandoned buildings, their broken windows staring out at the water like dead eyes. Darren parked a block away and checked the gun Georgetown had insisted he carry. Her late husband's service revolver, old but reliable. Montgomery carried a similar weapon, along with recording equipment that would capture whatever happened next. "Remember," Montgomery said as they approached the warehouse on foot, "we need evidence, confessions, something that ties Rockville to everything he's done." "I don't care about evidence," Darren replied. "I care about getting them out alive." The warehouse loomed before them like a concrete cathedral of decay, its loading dock doors rusted shut and its upper windows dark. But light leaked from a side entrance, and voices carried on the evening air. They crept closer, staying low and using shipping containers for cover. Through a dirty window they could see into a vast open space lit by harsh industrial lights. Debbie sat tied to a chair in the center of the room, her face pale but defiant. 20 feet away, Bethesda was similarly bound, a gag over her mouth and terror in her eyes. Between them stood Rockville Senate himself, immaculate in a $1,000 suit that looked obscene in the grimy surroundings. 2 armed men flanked him, hired muscle with dead eyes and expensive guns. "All you have to do is sign," Rockville was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the thin walls. "A simple statement, admitting you manipulated Darren Preece for financial gain, that you never loved him, only saw an opportunity to exploit a grieving man." "Go to hell," Debbie spat. Rockville nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward and backhanded Bethesda across the face. The younger woman's cry of pain was muffled by the gag, but the sound hit Debbie like a physical blow. "Every minute you delay causes your sister more pain," Rockville said conversationally. "Sign the statement, and you both walk away. Refuse and, well, accidents happen in places like this." "You're insane," Debbie said. "Even if I sign that, Darren will never believe it. He knows I love him." "Love?" Rockville laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. "You think that pampered prince knows anything about real feeling? He's been playing dress-up with his grief for 5 years. You're just the latest costume in his collection." "You don't know him. I know he's weak. I know he's been hiding from life since his precious Elena died. And I know that when the world sees your signed confession, combined with photographs of you in compromising positions with other men, photographs I had taken by very talented professionals, his fragile little heart will shatter all over again." Darren had heard enough. He looked at Montgomery and saw his own rage reflected in his friend's eyes. "On 3, Darren mouthed, they burst through the side door like avenging angels, weapons drawn and voices raised in commands that cut through the air like whip cracks. "FBI, nobody move!" The 2 guards went for their guns immediately, training overriding surprise. Montgomery dropped one with a clean shot to the shoulder, while Darren tackled the other, sending them both crashing into a stack of wooden crates with bone-jarring force. Rockville pulled a small pistol from his jacket and aimed it at Debbie's head. "Stay back! I'll kill her!" "No," Darren said, rising from the unconscious guard with blood on his knuckles and lethal determination in his eyes. "You won't." There was a certainty in his voice, the conviction that came from a man who'd lost everything once and refused to lose it again, that made Rockville hesitate. In that moment of doubt, Debbie threw her weight sideways, toppling her chair and rolling away from the gun's aim. Darren fired once, the bullet taking Rockville in the wrist and sending his weapon spinning across the concrete floor. The billionaire businessman crumpled, clutching his bleeding hand and screaming about lawyers and immunity. "The only consequence," Darren said, standing over him, "is that you're going to prison for a very long time." He was already moving toward Debbie, his gun forgotten as he freed her from the ropes with hands that shook with adrenaline and relief. The moment her bonds were cut, she threw herself into his arms, and he held her like she was the most precious thing in the universe. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands roaming over her face and shoulders, checking for injuries. "I'm okay." But Bethesda... Montgomery was already freeing her sister, his voice gentle as he assured her she was safe. The younger woman sobbed with relief as the gag came off, and Debbie rushed to hold her. "How did you find us?" Debbie asked through her tears. "I'll always find you," Darren replied simply. "No matter where you are, no matter who tries to keep us apart, I'll always come for you." The FBI arrived as promised, taking Rockville and his hired muscle into custody while EMTs checked everyone for injuries. Montgomery handed over the evidence briefcase, explaining how they'd tracked the criminal conspiracy from beginning to end. "This should put him away for 20 to life," the lead agent told Darren. "Wire fraud, kidnapping, extortion, conspiracy, you name it, he's guilty of it." As the authorities cleaned up the scene, Darren and Debbie found themselves alone on the pier, watching the sun set over water that reflected the sky like molten gold. She was still shaking from the ordeal, and he kept one arm around her waist, anchoring her to safety. "You risked everything to save us," she said softly. "Your safety, your life. You could have been killed. What's the point of being safe if you're not here to share it with me?" He turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face. "I'm done pretending I can live without you. Done letting other people dictate our happiness. I love you, Debbie Bell, and I don't care who knows it. But your company, your reputation, will survive. They survived the scandal once. They'll survive whatever comes next. But I won't survive losing you again." She was reaching up to kiss him when a voice cut through their moment like a blade through silk. How touching. They turned to see Arlington Embassy stepping out of a black sedan, her red dress a splash of color against the industrial gray surroundings. She moved toward them with predatory grace, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Arlington," Darren said, his voice carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning up loose ends." Her laugh was music played in a minor key. "Did you really think exposing Rockville would solve all your problems, that you could just ride off into the sunset with your little housemaid? The media will retract their stories once the truth comes out," Debbie said. "Everyone will know I was set up." "Will they?" Arlington's smile widened. "Even when they learn about the baby?" The words hit like physical blows. Darren went rigid beside her, and Debbie felt the world tilt on its axis. "What baby?" Darren's voice was barely above a whisper. Arlington placed one perfectly manicured hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby, darling. The one conceived the night you came to me after your little gold digger ran away. Don't you remember? You were so heartbroken, so vulnerable. One thing led to another." "That's impossible," Darren said, but doubt was creeping into his voice. "I never. The night after she left, you drank most of a bottle of scotch and called me, crying about how empty the house felt. I came over to comfort you and—" She shrugged elegantly. "Grief makes people do things they normally wouldn't." Debbie felt her heart shatter all over again. The happiness of their reunion, the joy of their rescue, everything beautiful they'd reclaimed, all of it turned to ash in her mouth. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice hollow. Darren looked confused, shaken. "I remember drinking. I remember calling someone, but I thought it was Montgomery." "I have the phone records," Arlington said sweetly, "and the hotel receipts. We spent the night at the Ritz-Carlton because you said the estate had too many memories. Don't you remember the champagne? The way you said Elena's name when you—" "Stop." Debbie couldn't listen to any more. The love she'd seen in Darren's eyes was being poisoned by doubt, by the possibility that grief and alcohol had led him to someone else's bed. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," Arlington continued. "But I thought you should know before you make any more foolish decisions about your future. Darren will have responsibilities now. To me, to our child. He can't afford to play house with the help anymore." Debbie turned and walked away before either of them could stop her, her heart breaking all over again. Behind her, she heard Darren calling her name, heard Arlington's musical laughter following her into the darkness. Just when she thought they'd won, just when forever had seemed possible, the past had reached out to claim them one more time, and this time she wasn't sure their love was strong enough to survive it. Chapter 10. The Promise of Tomorrow. The most beautiful endings are really beginnings in disguise, moments when everything broken finally finds its way back to wholeness, when love stops fighting the world and starts changing it instead. The truth arrived like sunrise after the longest night, gentle but undeniable, washing away the shadows that had threatened to consume their happiness forever. Debbie was packing her meager belongings for the second time in 2 months when Alexandria Potomac burst through her apartment door, waving a manila folder like a battle flag and wearing a smile that could have powered the entire eastern seaboard. "Put down that suitcase right now," Alexandria commanded. "You're not going anywhere." "Alex, I can't deal with this anymore. The lies, the manipulation, Arlington's pregnancy is complete bullshit." Alexandria slammed the folder down on the coffee table with triumphant finality. "Medical records, honey. Official documentation from Arlington Embassy's own gynecologist proving she's not pregnant and hasn't been pregnant in over 2 years." Debbie's hands stilled on her half-packed clothes. "What?" "Apparently, our dear Arlington has a condition called endometriosis that makes pregnancy extremely difficult without medical intervention. Her doctor was very thorough in documenting her reproductive challenges when she applied for fertility treatments last year." Alexandria's grin was predatory. Treatments that failed, by the way. But the hotel records she mentioned, fabricated. Darren never called her that night. Montgomery has his phone records. The only person he called was his therapist's crisis line. Spent 2 hours talking to a counselor about grief and loss and how much he missed you. The folder contained everything: medical records, phone logs, even security footage from the Ritz-Carlton showing Arlington entering and leaving alone that night, while Darren was 40 miles away at the estate, passed out drunk in his study with Montgomery watching over him. "She fabricated the entire story," Alexandria continued, "down to the smallest detail. Professional-level gaslighting designed to make you both doubt what you know to be true." Debbie sank onto her couch, the relief so overwhelming she felt lightheaded. He didn't sleep with her. Not only did he not sleep with her, he's been systematically dismantling her lies for the past 48 hours. Fairfax Supreme is handling the legal ramifications. Apparently filing false paternity claims is both a civil and criminal matter. Where is he now? Alexandria's smile softened into something tender and knowing. "Waiting for you to come home." The drive to the Priest estate felt like a journey through a fairy tale landscape, everything bright and new and possible again. The gates stood open as if expecting her, and the gardens blazed with late spring flowers that seemed to dance in celebration of her return. She found him in the conservatory, sitting at the piano for the first time since Elena's death. His fingers moved across the keys with hesitant grace, picking out a melody that sounded like hope, learning to sing again. When he saw her in the doorway, the music stopped abruptly. "Debbie." Her name on his lips was a prayer answered, a dream made real. "Arlington lied about everything," she said without preamble. "The pregnancy, the hotel, all of it. I know." He stood slowly, as if sudden movements might make her disappear again. "I'm sorry I doubted, even for a moment. I'm sorry I let her poison what we have with her lies. You were protecting yourself. After everything you've been through, of course you'd question." "No." He moved toward her with deliberate steps, his blue eyes blazing with intensity. "I should have known immediately that it was impossible. Not because I didn't sleep with her, but because sleeping with anyone else would have been a betrayal of what I feel for you. my heart, my body, my soul, they all belong to you now, completely and forever." When he reached her, he dropped to one knee right there on the conservatory floor, pulling a ring box from his pocket with hands that trembled with emotion. "This isn't how I planned to do this," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "I had speeches prepared, grand gestures planned, but I can't wait another moment to ask you properly." The ring inside the box was different from the first one, a stunning oval diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the afternoon light and threw it back in brilliant rainbows. "This was my great-grandmother's ring," he explained. "She told me once that it should go to the woman who taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every day, even when the world tries to tear you apart." Darren, Debbie Bell, you are the strongest, most beautiful, most impossible woman I have ever known. You saved my life, not once but a dozen times. You saw through my walls when everyone else saw only surfaces. You loved me when I couldn't love myself. His voice broke slightly. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger with reverent care, then stood to kiss her with all the passion and promise that had been building between them for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply, "for always." "I love you too," she replied, "for everything." Their wedding took place 6 weeks later in the same vineyard where they'd planned their first ceremony, but this time surrounded by everyone who mattered. Bethesda walked Debbie down the aisle while Georgetown sobbed happy tears in the front row. Montgomery served as best man, and Alexandria caught the bouquet with triumphant flair. The ceremony was simple and perfect, vows written from the heart, rings blessed by tears of joy, and a kiss that sealed promises that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than steel. "Ladies and gentlemen," the minister announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Darren Preece." The reception flowed like a dream made real. They danced to the same song that had played during their first magical moment in the moonlit garden, surrounded by fairy lights and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. "Happy?" Darren asked as they swayed together under the Virginia stars. "Delirious," Debbie replied, her head on his shoulder and her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "I never knew happiness could feel like this." "Like what?" "Like coming home." 6 months after the wedding, Darren broke ground on the new Elena Rosewood Center for Pediatric Oncology, a state-of-the-art research facility that would serve as his beloved friend's living memorial. At the dedication ceremony, with Debbie glowing beside him in a way that spoke of beautiful secrets, he spoke words that finally laid the past to rest. "Elena taught me that love doesn't end with death. It transforms. It becomes something larger than ourselves, something that heals and helps and gives meaning to loss." His hand found Debbie's, their wedding rings catching the sunlight. "This center is her love made manifest, but it's also proof that hearts can love more than once, more than one person, more than we ever thought possible." The crowd applauded, but Debbie only had eyes for her husband, this man who'd learned to honor his past while embracing his future, who'd turned grief into purpose and found peace in love. 2 weeks later, she surprised him with news that made his eyes fill with tears of pure joy. "Really?" he asked, his hands hovering over her still flat belly as if it contained the most precious treasure in the universe. "Really? We're having a baby." He dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her stomach, listening for something only he could hear. When he looked up at her, his face was radiant with wonder. "Boy or girl?" "Too early to tell. Does it matter?" "Not even a little bit. As long as they're healthy and they have your heart." and your stubbornness, and your compassion, and your brilliant mind. They spent the evening planning nurseries and choosing names, laughing about the chaos of sleep deprivation and marveling at the miracle of creating life together. When they finally went to bed, Darren held her close and whispered the words that had become their evening ritual. "Thank you," he said against her hair. "For what? For seeing me, for saving me, for choosing me every day. Thank you for being worth choosing." As spring turned to summer and Debbie's pregnancy progressed, their happiness seemed to transform everyone around them. Georgetown hummed while she cooked. Montgomery smiled more than he frowned, and even the estate's gardens seemed to bloom with renewed enthusiasm. On a warm evening in late July, as they sat on the terrace watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Darren reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever think about how different things would have been if you'd taken a different job that day?" he asked. Debbie smiled, her hand resting on her rounded belly where their child grew strong and safe. "I think about how many miracles had to align for us to find each other. How I had to lose everything to gain everything. How you had to be broken before you could be whole." "Fate?" "Love," she corrected. "Love that was patient enough to wait for the right moment, strong enough to survive the worst storms, and brave enough to trust in tomorrow." He pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his side, how completely she'd transformed his world from a beautiful prison into a sanctuary of joy. "You know what the best part is?" he asked. "What?" "This isn't the ending. This is just the beginning. We have forever to discover what love can build when it's given the chance to grow." Their daughter was born on a snowy December morning, arriving with Debbie's fierce spirit and Darren's thoughtful eyes. They named her Hope Eleanor Preece, hope for the future they'd fought to claim, Elena for the friend whose love had blessed their beginning. As Darren held his daughter for the first time, looking at his wife who'd made every dream he'd been afraid to dream come true, he whispered the words that would become family legend. "You didn't just work in my house, Debbie. You became my home. You and Hope, you're everything I never knew I needed, everything I thought I'd lost the right to have. This is what forever feels like." And in that moment, surrounded by love and snow and the promise of all the tomorrows stretching ahead of them, Debbie knew with perfect certainty that some love stories don't end. They just keep beginning, deeper and truer with each passing day. Their fairy tale was real, and it was theirs, and it would last forever. The end.